The Starside Prophecy by Tirri. Read by the author. Chapter 8. The Caves. Salvatore took a deep lungful of the freshest air he had ever breathed, while inhaling the aroma of what smelled like orange blossom, and as the raucous evening of the square faded, he wondered what Gwendolyn's new mission might entail. Salvatore laughed at the thought of Justinian home alone drinking the limoncello he had stolen. Was Justinian a good match for Gwendolyn? Sal wasn't sure. After walking around a sweeping tree-lined bend, the rolling countryside began to open up. It was not the first time that the fairy tale paradise Melchizedek had created to support life on earth caused a swell of appreciation so great that Sal almost had to steady himself against a tree. The owl perched somewhere in the branches hooted a greeting at Salvatore, which he acknowledged with a salute. The starry night sky and the moonbeams, mixed with remembrances of a route he had taken 1,000 times before, would allow for a very peaceful and perhaps contemplative journey. Although Starside was a place devoid of weeds, pollution, insects, excessive noise, foul odours, disease, decay and crime, the caves were more repugnant than even the most extravagant imagination could evoke. Those living there resided in the underground catacombs in self-imposed exile, a place only very advanced souls could tolerate visiting, and then not for too long. The particular entrance to the cave Salvatore sought would take about an hour to reach. Having been stuck on the lower levels of ascension longer than any other of Melchizedek's creations, the lost soul Sal was looking for had been hiding deep in the subterranean dwelling for millennia. Much of the manpower necessary to facilitate the comfort and well-being of all star-sized life forms, human, animal, aquatic and plant, was pulled from the lost souls residing in the caves. All blue-collar personnel wore jumpsuits, which varied in colour depending on their job. Not one lost soul had ever been subject to any criticism or judgment, despite their obvious weaknesses. The ability to manage one's thoughts in the physical had always been accepted to be mercilessly challenging by those who had achieved ascension. Who could say how much negativity one might create, and for how long, and to what extent? The vast majority of the extinct species that had been wiped out by the process of natural selection back on Earth were sheltered somewhere starside. All had resumed their evolution peacefully, without predators or bacteria thwarting their progress. Salvatore needed a volunteer to oversee the breeding program for the platypuses. The cave dweller Salvatore had in mind would be perfect for the role, and the fringe benefits could be highly beneficial to his spiritual growth, should he be altruistic enough to accept. Salvatore would again remind this lost soul that being of service to others in order that he might come to terms with the idea that he was not the centre of the universe would be the best thing for him. As he pursued his journey eastward, Salvatore passed several personnel coming and going between parishes, gamekeepers, horticulturalists and housekeepers. Rarely did they engage each other, and most appeared quite drone-like in their actions. All were immersed in their private worlds of self-inquiry and reflection. Salvatore knew them all intimately and radiated love as he passed, but he never addressed them, lest he interrupt any meaningful inner work that might be taking place. The tree of life ahead of him had been planted as a sapling by Salvatore himself to commemorate those who had entered the Ascension program during history's most trying periods. The General, as Salvatore had christened the tree, offset the dense energy that seeped out of the surrounding ground. Various species of mammal coexisted peacefully in the General's branches, and under the loving care of a former mafia hitman, the chimpanzees and the koalas were enjoying pieces of fruit being hand-fed to them. While physical, the relationships many gamekeepers had formed with their fellow humans had been markedly less fulfilling than the relationships they had formed with their pets. They would be required to remedy this. As Salvatore continued toward his destination, he had to duck when a chimpanzee threw a banana at his head. Salvatore remembered earlier that evening hurling a tomato at his sous chef. Karma's a bitch, he thought as he chuckled to himself. The gamekeeper grinned. a rare sight. In the distance, a lone horticulturalist dressed in orange was squatting, planting seeds in a circle surrounding a large grouping of bird baths. Salvatore knew her well and had advocated that from time to time her consciousness be infused with sufficient numbing energy to help her feel more restful than she otherwise might. Although this particular soul was responsible for the sacrifice of hundreds of children during the rise and fall of the Mayan civilization, she now had a reputation as one of Starside's supreme nurturers, caring for her seedlings with the gentleness of a mother stroking the face of her newborn. Salvatore sighed. Of necessity, her future lifetimes would be brutal, and he wondered how many more centuries would lapse before her willingness to face what she knew she must would arise. Salvatore understood that facing the karmic experiences of one's previous action required guts, and not all souls were up for the task. But he also understood that if her future was left to her, she would choose to remain Starside for eternity. As a countermeasure, and with direct thought application, Salvatore began the initiation protocol that would slowly and incrementally revive her memory. The horticulturalist twitched. By Friday morning, this particular soul would be ready to meet with him, and by the afternoon she might even be willing to return to Earth. The cave's entrance, concealed by a thicket of emerald green artificial bracken, was now just a few hundred yards ahead. Natural plant life had never been able to grow there for long. Salvatore could already feel the fearful energy radiating out of the ground, with his feet becoming hot. This sector of the caves was home to those wanting to exist in the proximity of others just like them, the severely maladjusted onto whom they could project their torment. These souls would remain in their miserable condition until they were willing to re-enter the physical for atonement. Many of the dwellers of this cramped, hot and loveless place had been there for centuries, some for millennia, and the longer they remained there, the more corrupt their energy had become. The original appearance of some of the cave dwellers had changed entirely, but Salvatore and his team of rescuers knew every aspect of these souls' inner conditions regardless. Salvatore pulled the bracken aside and took in a deep lungful of air before stepping downward into this unfortunate but temporary hell. In order to reach the sector he was looking for, he would have to stoop and crawl for over a mile.